Okay, let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Whatever time you are watching, we are back with a brand new episode of Round Table with Full Frame Kicks. And tonight is a very, very special episode. As always, I've got my co-host with me, Leon, Avery, and Andy. They will introduce themselves in a minute, as always. But tonight we have two very, very special guests on the show. Very excited. First up, we have Ben Plummer, former Nike employee, former professional ice hockey player, full-time dad, and skateboarding aficionado. We've also got Alvin Singfield, buyer and general manager of Attitude in Colchester, former BMXer who switched to skateboarding and is one of the influential real OGs within the scene. So guys, thank you very, very much for coming on. Say hello to the cameras, plug yourselves, and over to you guys.
Hello.
I'll let you go first now.
Did. Hello.
Love it. Go on then,
yeah,
Ben.
that made me sound far more important than I am. I'm Ben. I like shoes.
Thank Andy for that. Fantastic. Andy, Leon?
Yeah, I mean, my name is Leon. I quit my job in October to pursue the dream of designing and manufacturing my own pair of shoes. I detail all of the experience on my Instagram page.
And I'm Andy Wilson, Sneaker Dog, the Sneakonomist, just trying to concentrate on the financial business side of the sneaker world and try and bring it into a format that's quite interesting. That's what I try to do anyway.
Excellent. Okay, so we are going to get on with the show. So to our viewers, if you don't already know, it is all going to be about the skateboarding era, Nike SB and everything around it. And we have got some fantastic questions for our guest tonight. So I'm going to kick things off. First things first, this is obviously to both of you, did your love for skateboarding draw you to working in the industry or the other way round?
Who's going first?
You go first out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because I started skating years before I worked in the industry. I think I got my first board for Christmas 1985 when I was 12. Then obviously properly started skating the following year in 1986, which is why on the bio for Attitude it says decks and kicks since 86. So that's kind of the first year I suppose I properly, was skating and started getting into trainers at the same time. And then through, it was 86, 87, 88. And then I started working for Rad magazine as a writer and photographer while I was at school and college. And then I left school and went to college. And then while I was in my first year at college, I got offered a job working for Phase 7 Distribution, who were the biggest distributor for skateboards in the UK back in the 90s or 80s and 90s. And I quit college, which some might say was a stupid decision, but and went to work for Phase 7 in London. And then I worked for them for over a decade, running the skateboard team. We created three main brands, Big Spin Skateboards, Panic Skateboards, and Blueprint Skateboards, which went on to be the biggest selling skateboard brand in the world outside of America. And then I left there in 2001 and went to run some skate shops called Hoax, which we had from 2001 to 2007 when the recession caused them to close. Then I went off and worked for Volcom for 5 years, and then Attitude, which we've now, it's now 10 years old this year. So
amazing.
My journey through the industry.
Impressive, real OG, as they say.
Very well travelled indeed.
That's such a nice way of saying you're an old fart, isn't it?
It's a lot more of an intro than the hello at the beginning, I think.
Yeah, no.
Al's too humble. Al's far too humble.
Alvin's come alive now. He's ready to go. Love it. Thank you very much, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I skated my whole childhood. I was a skate rat. I had, obviously, Hoax was one of my locals, as well as Big Worms from Harlow, which a lot of people will probably remember. They were a pretty awesome shop. seeing the skate industry up close as a kid, and like being around people like Cates, McGee, Nicholson, who were all massive skaters and went on to do really big things in the industry, sort of like Horsey as well, for instance. He went to America and ended up skating for Todd Bertrand, which is someone I used to watch skate. Won't know me, I said I was a little skate rat in the shop. Some people that annoy out on the weekends that sit there trying to grip decks for people and just hang around and get in the way.
That's what it was all about, wasn't it?
Oh, big time, yeah. Spending weekends in the shop, just sitting there watching the videos on the TV in the store, getting in the way from the people actually trying to do a job, and generally being an annoying little kid. Yeah, that was some skating. That led me into shoes to a massive degree. The guy that ran the shop in Harlow, that I said, Big Worms, now he's doing awesome stuff online, putting up old skate videos on YouTube, putting up old skate shoe catalogs on their Instagram account. You can go and see all the old Circus, ES, everything. And that drew me to beginning into shoes. And then as I hit 14, 15, I wouldn't say transitioned out of skating, but I did stop for quite a while, and I went more into just heavily into shoes. Started buying Air Force Ones off the internet. eBay was my first pair, I think, when I was a kid. White and orange high Air Force One with NYC on the heel, probably were fake. Couldn't tell you. I don't even know if that colorway was ever actually made, but they cost me like 50 quid, and that was the first pair, and I treasured them, cleaned them every day after school, and that led me down the path of trying to get a job at Nike, where I was for 7 years. And then
how did you get that job, if you don't mind me asking?
I didn't know anybody. I grew up outside of London in Hertfordshire and sort of on the border of Essex. I wasn't in the industry. I didn't know people. I just had a love for shoes, and the internet wasn't what it was back then. So it was really sort of going into the shops at the weekend, talking to people. I used to go in there, drop my CV in and just harass everyone until eventually I got invited for an interview. I was in the big group interview thing, went all through that, and at the end of it, they gave me a call and just offered me the job there and then. And that was amazing. That was that. Yeah. Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you. Great start. Andy, do you want to lead with the next question, or has anybody got anything to say?
I was just going to say that. So when you started at Nike, was that through the retail, or was it straight into sort of more of?
No, that was retail. I started in the women's wear department in Nike Town in Oxford Street. Right. Which was, I'd worked in retail for years. I was the store manager for Choice before then, as well as a couple of other places. But it's a different world when you're in Nike Town in London. I mean, both the customers, the staff, the company, everything, it's a different kettle of fish. You cannot prepare someone to work in that environment.
The foot traffic alone is ridiculous around that crazy spot. Store. Yeah.
Absolutely insane. I mean, it's the world flagship. We were always told it's the biggest Nike store in the world. I was fortunate enough to show Phil Knight around when he came and visited for what I was told was the first time, which seems insane. But it might have been. I mean, he doesn't need to come and see it. He doesn't need to leave his house. So.
Yeah, people do that for him. He'll just leave them to. But I mean, I guess they're almost like a Nike Town, particularly from a few years ago. They're almost like a showroom. If you compare that to something like a JD, where they're packing all the stuff in, and it's all about how much you can squeeze into that square footage. But a Nike Town
customer experience,
4 or 5 floors, and then you can, and I'm sure that might change a bit with the whole DTC and them trying to sell more stuff.
I mean, it's a different world now from when I was there. But I mean, at the time, it was very much part of my job was customer experience, and it was giving the customer the best experience possible. And Nike really cared about that when I was there. So they didn't care whatsoever about. I mean, they cared about taking money. That's a complete lie. But the targets weren't there to be hit. The targets were there sort of as a guideline. The thing was get a customer to come in, give them an awesome experience, make it like a theme park, if you will, for lack of a better term, and then they'll come back time and time again and continue spending. So I mean, we had the ground floor was purely an event space. There wasn't an aim to sell product on that floor. That was literally customers walk in, have a good time, have an experience. Whatever product was launching would be the focus. Obviously, it's still a key point of driving sales, but you want people to have fun. I mean, they had a bowl in there at one stage. We had during the Olympics, we had absolutely insane challenges with a fitness app going on, and we had picked like the athletes who were coming into the store from the Olympics were taking part and competing in front of customers. We were absolutely knackering ourselves, showing off, trying to do high jump and all this sort of stuff and fast speed. So it was purely like an experience-based thing, and that's what I loved about it. And yeah, it did start to change a little bit, but I think that especially for that store, because of its size and its layout, they do really focus on experience a lot more than trying to just shove shoes in your face and sell you stuff. To a degree, Nike don't need to do that. The product sells itself anyway. If people want a shoe, they know what they're going in there for. Yeah. So
I guess
Totally.
they're inviting you into a world where you're falling in love with the brand, and you're almost like when you're Disney, and you're sort of they're feeding everything Disney to you, and everyone's suddenly
Oh
walking
yeah.
around with Mickey Mouse t-shirts and all that sort of stuff, and it's just I know you don't quite suddenly start thinking that things are cool like that, but it's just about, isn't it, just about making you fall
Oh,
in
you've got to live the brand, live and breathe it, especially when you worked there. I mean, there were definitely people, my other half included, that didn't, but they had to put on a brave face and pretend like they did.
So like, yay, Nike.
Yeah.
Were you, really quickly, Andy, were you working there before they were selling SB?
No, it was there.
Because I remember at one stage they didn't sell it from the beginning, because I remember they used to do a few pop-ups on the ground floor of SBs back in the day. And then obviously they started selling it full time.
In a weird way, it was there when I started at the company.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to handle it. I still don't know if they do in that store.
No,
they would
definitely not.
move it around the floor. They take it off the
still
floor
do.
if it
Yeah.
wasn't performing. Then they put it back out if something happened in skating that was bringing the news in. They were a bit late on that. I thought they couldn't get the shoes in the store. A lot. Orange Label didn't exist back then, but Nike Town wasn't the one to get the shoes. You had Slam, who had the sort of SB store, if you will, and they'd get a lot of the stock. It was a weird one, and there were people in that store that really tried to push it and really cared about it. A couple of skaters that worked there, that they really that was their department, and they wanted it to sell because then it reflects better on SB and on the skate side of the brand. But the company didn't really support it. It wasn't running on football, so especially at that time. So a lot of the time it got taken off the floor or hidden in a corner when no one could see it, or
maybe
really
it wasn't mainstream enough for them.
I still feel it's like that
it
today, though. I still feel it's like that today in there. Like they keep on moving it around today, and then the last time I was in there, they didn't even have anything.
No, I went in obviously before lockdown. I think it was in between lockdowns, if you can call it that. The brief couple of weeks, and they had 2 shoes on the main shoe wall on the second floor, and none of the apparel out. And I asked if it was in there, and they said, "Yeah, but it's in the stock room. We're not going to get it out." And that answers my question.
Exactly. Fair enough.
So, how would you say, thinking back to the 80s, 90s, and back to sort of seeing a snapshot of now, other than technology changing and social media, Al, how would you say that sort of skateboarding's changed from what you knew it as to how it is now? And I know you were skating before, and I presume you might dust off the old skateboard now and again, but you're probably spending less time on a board than you were. Maybe I'm wrong, but how has it changed in your opinion?
I mean, in the 80s, it was all very, in the UK, it was all very new, because you'd obviously had that initial skateboarding craze, if you like, at the end of the 70s, where everybody had the polyprop boards, the skinny small boards. I was brought up in London, so like when I was very young, my dad had taken me to a couple of the skate parks in London, like Skate City, which used to be a big outdoor park on South Bank, just up the road from where South Bank is, which is a big outdoor concrete park. And then there was one called Mad Dog Bowl, which was on the Old Kent Road, which was named after Tony Alva. But I've very limited memory of it, apart from it being like indoors and being really loud, and obviously being really young and loads of really older kids or blokes skating around. And then as you said, obviously in the intro, when I moved out to Essex, skateboarding hadn't really ever, if there'd been parks, they were short-lived. I got into BMXing quite heavily in the early 80s when I was very young, and I was quite good at it. I got sponsored. I travelled all over the UK and Europe, racing BMXs. I was on telly a couple of times. So that sort of thing, which was great. And then through BMXing, a couple of the guys I used to ride with got skateboards from America, like the bigger ones. This is kind of around 84, 85. And then I think that's where I first had a go on it again and decided I wanted to skate again. So we found a shop in London called Hill Cycles, which was in Muswell Hill, which was the only shop. There was no shop in Essex that sold skateboards. I found this cycle shop, and they had skateboards. So that's where I got my first skateboard, proper, for Christmas 1985. But yeah, I mean, in the late 80s, it was a lot smaller. So wherever you lived, whether it was Colchester or London or wherever, you knew the other skaters. And when you went into London, you saw other skaters, and there was an instant connection between everybody, you know, and that's different now because of social media and because skateboarding is obviously a lot bigger now than it was then, a lot bigger, and everything's different with it. You know, back then you had your small pocket of locals that you skated with, and you travel to maybe the next town, you know, before you could drive on the train, and you'd meet more skaters there, and that was new and exciting because there was no internet or anything. So the only way you knew anything about skateboarding was from the magazines, which were hard to come by, the American magazines, Thrasher and Transworld. And then obviously the English magazine, which at the time was called BMX Action Bike, which had a pullout called Read and Destroy, which was skateboarding, which then evolved into being its own magazine, Read and Destroy, or RAD as for short. And then basically having that every month, you know, once a month you have your subscription, and RAD would turn up and it would have, you know, these guys from whether it was London or Manchester or Scotland or, you know, the different local scenes, and you'd suddenly realize there were more people out there like you who liked what you liked and the music you liked. And even back then videos were very few and far between. You know, you'd get, you know, maybe 2 or 3 American videos that would make their way over to the UK over a year with the pro skateboarders on.
So that would be like a VHS or Betamax video. That you
yeah. I mean, I never had Betamax. That was a bit before my time, but VHS, yeah, it was. There was Pal Peralta, which is still a brand now. That was a huge brand. They had their videos. There was Santa Cruz, which was the other really big American brand, and they had their videos. And normally the two of them would release a new video probably once a year, and that was a big event to have this new video came in. You got to keep in mind these videos were about £40 each to buy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they were imported from the States. I remember me and my friend went up to London and we bought a video each. And it was Bones Brigade Video 1 and 2, which was called Bones Brigade Video Show and Future Primitive. And we had one each, and then we basically came home on the train, watched them, and then we just watch them, swap over, watch them. And then, like I said, yeah, gradually, you know, there were skaters in the town who were happy just to stay in the town and happy in that scene. But once I'd seen the magazines and I could see these, and for us, the next nearest scene was London. So then I was always on the train going into London, and I was making friends at South Bank and Stockwell and Cantelows or wherever we were going to skate, and you'd meet people and hang out. And then, like what Ben was saying with Big Worms, for me, because we didn't obviously have a skate shop in Colchester, there never was until we actually Hoax in 2001 was the first skate shop ever. You know, we never had a skate shop, so I'd go to. And keep in mind, this isn't Slam City Skates as it is now. This is the first Slam City Skates, which was a completely different company, just had the same name. It wasn't the same company. This one was started by a guy called Paul Sunman, who was a pro. No, he wasn't a pro, but he was a very good freestyle skateboarder, and he was a very good photographer. And his first shop was in Talbot Road, which is just off the Portobello Road, and it was in the basement of Rough Trade Records, the first Rough Trade Records. And I just started going up there, and like Ben said, I'd just hang around in there, get in the way, be the annoying kid asking questions and wanting to watch the videos. And you know, then when I got my first job, I'd buy mail order from them, because before there was internet, there'd be a double page spread in the magazine with all the latest decks and trucks and wheels. So I'd buy my setup from them, and like every month I get paid, and every month I buy a brand new setup. You know, and it was always from those guys, because they were like, you know, like I said, they were the only kind of shop. You know, and it was good, and I built up a good relationship with them. And then when the third Pal Peralta film came out, Search for Animal Chin, they had a premiere at a place called the Tabernacle, which was a like a venue just up the road from their shop in Talbot Road in West London. So we went to that, and then the following year they had a premiere for not ban this Public Domain. So we went to the premiere for that, and then, like I said, over time we just got to know more and more skaters, and that's kind of how it evolved, you know. And you'd start hanging out in London more, you start staying at people's houses and stuff like that, and then that's eventually how basically from being in London a lot, I'd start bumping into the photographers and guys from Read and Destroy magazine, and I just sort of latched onto them and hung out around them and watched them take photographs. I didn't own a camera or anything, but I basically decided if I wasn't good enough to be in a magazine, which I wasn't, then I could maybe do something for the magazine. I could write, or I could take pictures or whatever. Yeah. And I basically so I just sort of hung out with them, and I was like, oh, how can I get stuff in the magazine? And one day they gave in, and they were like, look, write this video review, which I did, and that got published. And then from there, I started having stuff in every issue. I did interviews of pro skaters, and eventually, as I got money for doing that, I started buying camera equipment and teaching myself how to take pictures. And then I had, over the years, I had a couple of front covers and stuff like that. And then, and then like I said, obviously when I got and then basically that's how the job at Phase 7 came along, obviously via knowing people and someone just saying to me one day, oh, the guy who owns Phase 7 is looking for someone to be the team manager and look after their UK riders who get sponsorship. You used to be a sponsored BMX, so you know how that stuff works. Maybe you'd be good at doing that. And like I said, I was at college. I wasn't very happy with what I was doing at college. And I thought, job in skateboarding, that sounds like a good idea. And 30 years later, I'm still here. So yeah, I guess it's
so the message really is for the younger generation now. That's proper graft that you put in to get where you are. I mean,
oh sure,
I'm not saying now we're blessed with the ability to be able to go on YouTube and search for anything. If you don't know how to do something, whether it's you've got a fault on your dishwasher, or you don't know how to change a car tire, or you don't, or change a washer, or whatever it is, you can go onto YouTube and you can just go and find out. Whereas before, you had to wait for a VHS cassette to come out come over from the States, or you had to. The only way you'd be able to rub shoulders with people was to go to a meet or an expo or whatever. Whereas now, suddenly you can get online, and if you're lucky, you can speak to. I don't know.
On that, what I think is crazy and what's a massive change is, I mean, obviously I was never going anywhere with skating as a career or anything like that. It's purely hobby and an enjoyable side of my life. But back then, if you were filming footage as a skater, that was gold, and that you treasured that and you saved it for the best opportunity. Now Instagram exists, everyone can get picked up and noticed, and it's such a different thing. It's a different world to what I grew up in, that's for sure. It's insane. But from an older side of it, and I think I would agree, like, you wouldn't waste footage. There was no such thing as footage you could waste. So you couldn't upload a clip of you doing it because you had to save that, and it was important. And now it all goes on Instagram, and it still blows my mind. Like, it's mad.
Did you watch mid-90s?
Yes. Absolutely cracking film. Brilliant film.
Cool.
s1e is a sick skater as well, by the way. Like, he's legit. Like, he is legit.
It perfectly captured that period of time, because although I'm not American, I did live in San Francisco when I was younger, and I spent a lot of time in LA with some of the pro skaters who have like feet, from that era, and it was incredible. I mean, I loved it. I love Jonah Hill anyway. The soundtrack, the clothing they were all wearing, everything about the film was great. It really took me back. It was beautiful. And that's a great thing now with everything though. And obviously Andy will know this because we've been chatting on Instagram about the Omega Flames drop in. That you can get to a point in your life where you're like, wow, I've been not collecting shoes, but I've been into trainers. I've been skateboarding for 35 years. And yet the thing that started that passion, the very first pair of trainers I ever bought was the Nike Omega Flames in 1985. 35 years later, I can own that shoe again, which I thought would never happen. When people talk, and
you go on about it more than any other shoe.
I do, and I did that before I ever thought it was going to ever exist again. Way before.
A special place in your heart.
Yeah. No, I mean, it really, really does. I mean, lots of trainers I owned, and obviously going to Nike SB. I mean, obviously we were on board Hoax. We were the third shop in the UK to get offered a Nike SB account after Slam and Ideal in Birmingham. And I wouldn't have took it normally. I think no course skate shop would have wanted to touch Nike of a barge pole back then.
Wow.
Every course skate shops were very anti. This is the nature of skateboarding, is being very anti.
It was a cult, wasn't it? Cult, wasn't it? Yeah.
You don't want a big conglomerate taking over the industry.
No. We were at Hoax. We did DC, we did DVS, Lakai, Etnies S, America, Globe, Circa, all of that was probably a little bit later, but we had all of those brands, all course skate shoe brands. And the only reason I did it was that a guy who I'd been very good friends with, who used to have a skate shop in Sheffield called Sumo, a guy called Sebastian Palmer, had to close the shop, and he'd gone to work for DC Shoes as the Northern rep. So I wasn't dealing with him myself, because being in Essex, we were dealing with the Southern rep, but I knew he was working for him up there. And then I was obviously at Hoax, and one day he rang me up and he's like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, how's it going? He's like, yeah, I've left DC. I'm working for Nike. And I was like, Nike? Doing what? Like, because it just seemed, Xavier was around, and we'd been buying Xavier for the shop, and we knew that Xavier had been bought by Nike, but everybody in the UK, we'd never seen the stuff that they talk about in Sneaker Freak, the Air Chode and these shoes. They'd only ever been pictures in fashion magazine. They'd never really made their way to the UK to skate shops. So there was no Nike skateboarding ever before Nike SB for the UK. The same as with the Dunk. No kid in the UK ever grew up skating in Dunks or Blazers or Bruins. It didn't happen. Most skateboarders of my generation, and even generation after, before there was a lot of skate shoes, wore Adidas or Puma.
Yeah.
Because they were affordable. The only proper skate shoes back in the 80s were Vans and Airwalk. And they were both fairly expensive, or they were probably about the same price as they are now, but were a little bit less. But you could buy a pair of Adidas Gazelles or Campus Forest Hills for like £30. And they were just as good, so you could get 2 pairs of Adidas or Puma Clydes or Suedes or Baskets, basically for the price of a proper pair of skate shoes, and they look dope.
And
so for that was my kind of thing with the shoes. It was after the Omega Flames, there really wasn't that vintage runner thing. It was sort of coming to an end, and you kind of then went into the era in the late 80s of the Air Max and the Air Max 90, obviously in 1990. And then those sorts of shoes in Essex were classed as being very chav, like a Reebok Classic. It was very chavvy to have that. And being a skateboarder, and by that point working in the industry, I just always wore skate shoes. So for me, my journey then for the next decade probably was purely through the shoes that we sold as a distributor, which was Etnies and then DC. And then through Hoax, obviously wearing the different skate shoe brands up until when SB dropped. And like I said, Seb rang me and he's like, "Oh, I'll come and show you these shoes." And like I said, if it hadn't have been him, if it had been some random dude like ringing up saying, "This is Malcolm from Nike, I want to come and show you some skateboard shoes," I probably would have laughed and put the phone down, but you just didn't know any different, but he came down, he was a friend, he got the Dunks, they were all Dunks, the first range, apart from one Blazer, the Paul Brown. And I just stood there and I was like, "Yeah, I'm on board." And it wasn't that I was on board because I'd seen the future, I knew what Nike was going to do. It was all based on product and the fact that I could see that just from somebody who liked trainers, regardless to whether skaters got on board with it, because at that point in time there was a lot of negativity about it, and we got stick, obviously not on the Instagram or on internet because that didn't exist, but we got stick from the local skaters for having Nike in the store. But it brought a different consumer through the door into the skate shops and into wearing skateboard apparel, which changed the industry forever.
And is this 2002? This is first SB.
Yeah, it's still 2003. It was 2003 for the UK. We were a year behind America and 2 seasons behind America. So the first shoes he showed me were the Colours by You, which was the Richard Mulder and the Reese Forbes and the Gino Iannucci. But we never had those shoes. The first shoes we did have were Orange Box, but that was like 2003. So it was kind of really early doors. It was early doors, 2003 spring, I think 2003, through to 2006-07. And then, like I said, obviously then, ironically, by that point, Hoax obviously went under because of the recession. And then SB, it had those first 5 years were the most important 5 years for SB at that point. By 2007, the Dunk hadn't come to an end, but it was definitely, fizzling out.
So it's interesting you say that you kind of got a little bit almost mocked for stocking Nike initially. And I'm just going to jump onto another question. So I've got just kind of out of order with Jamie, but
it's fine because they kind of marry up those next two.
How influential now is it having an SB account to the success of the skate shop compared to back then? So we now know from what you've explained back then, SB wasn't sort of like a big part of it, but now is it a deal breaker, do you think?
Yeah, I think the difference was back then shoes were a big part of our, and keep in mind that this was bricks and mortar. Hoax never had a website, an e-commerce website. Throughout, I think in the last few years we had done a very small website with purely our own brand stuff on it, because the guy who owned Hoax was very good at coming up with ideas for t-shirts. So he'd done lots of t-shirts and long sleeves and hoods and beanies and caps and that stuff, so he got a local guy to build this very basic website with that on it, but he couldn't get his head around e-commerce. And we kept saying to him, because we had 10 stores altogether. We had 5 skate shops, which I ran. We had 2 boutique streetwear stores, and then we had 3 surf shops, because the guy who owned it was a surfer himself. So he had 3 shops, which did Quicksilver, Billabong, Rip Curl, O'Neill, those kind of brands. Then we had the 5 Hoke skate shops, which were in Colchester, Chelmsford, Cambridge, Norwich, and Ipswich. And then we had 2 streetwear stores, because at that point I could see the evolution of that you could see that there was going to be the brands that I'd been into as a kid, like Stussy. Other brands were coming along that sat next to that almost got to a point where you could split it off to its own thing with trainers, obviously, with that. Because like I said, the skate shop thing was very much, you always had the skaters that would buy the skate shoes, and at this point I'm talking about DC and Etnies and DVS and Vans, obviously those brands. But then you did have other people that would come in and buy those just because maybe they used to skate, or they just liked the way that skateboarders looked, the skate style, which has led streetwear and fashion to some extent. You can ask Virgil all about that.
I used to go and buy all the skate shoes, the Etnies, and I wasn't a skateboarder, but I wore them because I was wide-footed, and I always loved a skate shoe, and Etnies was such a comfortable shoe. So,
I mean, we sold, there were certain models. I mean, Etnies had that one called the low cut. I don't know if you remember, that had the E on the side. And we sold,
I think I've still got a pair in the somewhere in the cupboard.
We sold thousands and thousands of them. Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. And a lot of that wasn't to skaters. And we got, in the last few years, we got into girls' footwear. We'd have a girls' wall, but still, when Nike and then a few years later, Adidas came into it, it was a completely different ball game. Bringing Nike SB and having those dunks in the shop. And you've got to remember that's exactly how it happened back then, because there wasn't really quick strikes. Everything was done on pre-order as an inline product. Even stuff like the Tiffany dunk was an inline dunk. It was sold from a pamphlet that we'd get with the pictures of the dunks in the Team Manager series, which included the Stussy dunk as well.
Yeah.
All of those were just on this little A5 size pamphlet we'd be given with line drawings of the shoes, and that's what you do your order from. But it was starting to bring in a different consumer into the store, and then I'd start with what I would call the little black book, and I'd have a little black book, and it would have locals' names in who I knew were going to be into the new dunk. And I was only finding this stuff out because at that point in America there was Nike Talk, and then Crooked Tongues had started up over here, and I'd started going on to Crooked Tongues, and just not even getting involved really, just going on the chat rooms and seeing what people were talking about. And seeing the interest in SB, and then we got to a point where I'd start getting phone calls from guys in London, and I think I was telling Ben about this one the other day with the manager of the Maharishi store, because we'd had the Uncle Dunkle dunk in the Dunk High, James Lavelle's Dunk High, designed by Futura, and we'd had that shoe in, and this guy rings up and he's like, "Oh, have you got any of the Dunkles left?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we've got 2 pairs." And he goes, "What size?" I said, "I think we've got 7 and a 10.5." And he's like, "Oh, I'm a 10.5. Could you hold them? I'm going to come down and get them." And he was apparently the manager of the then Maharishi store. And he literally said to the guy in the shop with him, "I'm just going to pop out for a few hours. I'll be back this afternoon." Obviously, got on the tube to Liverpool Street, got on the train to Colchester, got a taxi into town, came to the shop, bought them, got the taxi back to the train station, train back to London, and then went back in the shop with them in his hand. Because the only shop in London you could buy SBs from was Slam City Skates. Yeah. And then we were the next nearest shop to London, which ironically, all of these years later, we are again.
Totally.
Because we're the only SB account in the whole of East Anglia that has the level of account that we get to have dunks. Obviously, Nike have obviously the tiering now. See, even a lot of sketchers don't have Nike SB anymore anyway, or they just don't have access to dunks, and certainly not Orange Label or Quick Strike. So going back to what Andy said, I mean, it is an important part of it's not an important part of the business, but it is a part of the business. People do say stuff like, "Oh, if it wasn't for dunks, you wouldn't be in business, or you'd go under." And it's like, well, you don't know how many pairs we get, and if you're talking about something like a Quick Strike, and you maybe see you're getting even as a ballpark, if you're getting like 10 pairs or 12 pairs or 20 pairs of a shoe at £85 a pair. That doesn't actually add up to much.
There's nothing. There's not a lot of profit in that.
That actually, that ties into something I was going to ask a bit earlier, was with the surge of these SB and standalone Dunk products, are you seeing a halo effect with everything else in the shop? Or would you say that the Dunk kind of hype is very much self-contained?
Where we have locals or guys that come into the store who will buy SBs, then yeah, they will buy other stuff. And obviously a lot of the time it's hard now because we can't really do in-store launches anymore because of obviously, violence breaking out. And obviously we don't sell them online per se because of bots. Unfortunately, as a small independent retailer, we don't have the money to do have launches or Hanon launches, Foot Patrol launches, or even Flat Spot have launches. We don't have the kind of money to build a launches platform because that's something that's not just on your website. It has to be actually integrated as a separate website because of the way the e-commerce platform operates, and it's quite intricate.
And thousands.
Yeah. So it's a big investment. So for us, obviously, we work with the raffle system, which takes up a lot of time and a lot of effort. But it's the only real way that you can try and make sure the few shoes you get are trying to go to the right people, because you can wheedle out to some extent the resellers.
Definitely.
So that's part of what we're about. I don't want to, because it's not about the fact that we're paying for a shoe this much and we make this much markup and we sell the shoe for this much at retail. The fact that then guys can buy that shoe and sell it for like thousands of pounds on StockX. It's just the fact that we're so few shoes, and that's why on all of our posts it always says at the bottom, please keep in mind, for the limited amount of shoes we're allocated from Nike and 5,000, 10,000 people entering a raffle, your chances of winning are less than 0.01%. It is tiny,